two. I think it was a mistake in terms of what I had heard from two different parties about discussing the governor's order. So before we begin the meeting, in keeping with the governor's order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law relating to the COVID-19 emergency, the meeting will only have remote opportunities for participation. Public access is noted on our agenda tonight. The meeting is being televised on Watertown Cable Access Television, the government channel. You can join the meeting online through Zoom like you all have, and you can also join the meeting audio by phone. And you may email any comments to Lene Handy at Watertown Mass Watertown Mass. I just want to let people know that to stay informed about scheduled meetings, please sign up for Notify Me on the town website, because right now it's very tricky to schedule meetings. Only one meeting is allowed per evening. And I just want to reiterate, there's nothing on the agenda this evening for a public hearing. We're meeting with our consultant to review information that we had submitted earlier. So on that note, Lene, would you please do a roll call for me? Where's Lene? Lene. Oh, sorry.
You cannot.
Could you do a roll call for me, Lene? And let's unmute everyone. Can we unmute all?
All right, ready?
Yep.
Okay, we'll start with Elodia.
Here.
John Bakian.
I'm unmuting as I go along. This is very difficult. Sam, can you unmute everybody for the roll call, please?
Here.
Dennis Duff. Dennis Duff.
Sam, I'm not able to unmute.
Yeah, no, I pressed unmute all. If anybody's muted right now, it's because they muted themselves.
Okay, would you take everybody off mute then so they could do the roll call? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I did, but like they have to unmute themselves too.
Well, we can try.
Dennis, you need to unmute yourself.
Dennis
is on the phone. He should be able to talk.
Well, he shouldn't be muted.
I'm here.
Muted.
He's there. All right.
Yeah, present.
roll call, please.
Thank you. Alan Gallagher.
Here.
Susan Steele.
Here.
Maria Rose.
You have to mute yourself, Maria.
She's saying she did.
Multiple times I've unmuted myself.
There you are.
Getting muted.
We can hear you now, but you still look like you're on mute.
No, I can clearly see I'm able to talk. You hear me?
You're good. Yep.
Okay.
Bob DeRico.
Unmute. Bob is here.
Thank you.
Mark Kraskevich.
Mark?
Mark is muted too, I can see.
Here.
Okay,
Okay.
all present and accounted for.
I'm here too.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'd like to begin the meeting tonight with some opening remarks. As my father would say after I hadn't seen him for a while, long time no see. So needless to say, the world is quite different than it was when we last met in February. COVID-19 has changed how we live, how we conduct business in ways that none of us could possibly have imagined. And we're all in the process now of learning and adjusting to the new rules of the road. Over the foreseeable future, as the pandemic and the economic crisis continues to play out, we as a committee will need to be flexible and resilient, and the rules of the road may continue to change in ways that are difficult to predict. At our last meeting, I was unanimously re-elected chair, and I plan on doing everything I can to keep us on track and accomplishing our mission. We have really important work to do, and now in this climate of shrinking resources from state and local government, the CPA's potential value to the Watertown community is greater than it ever was. So from here we go. With that, let us begin. The next thing I would like to do is have a review and acceptance of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of February 27th?
All right. I make a motion that we accept the minutes of the February 27, 2020 meeting.
Thank you, Alan. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jason. Any discussion? Any discussion from the committee?
No.
I see no discussion. Lene, could you do another roll call, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Alodia,
Present, yes, I'm in favor.
John Bakian,
Aye.
Dennis.
You want to vote present, please?
Oh, okay. I just know that. Alan,
Aye.
Susan,
Abstain, I was not present.
that's right. Maria,
Aye, yes.
Bob,
Aye.
and Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And me.
Jason.
Jason.
Aye.
Lene, did you get Jason?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now, I sent you at the last minute because I got it at the last minute, the budget numbers for this CPC for this coming year. This is an estimate by Tom Tracy. And as you all know, if you've read the information from Stewart at the coalition, right now they're estimating about 11.2% match. It could go up, but that's their conservative estimate at this point in time. So I would like a motion. We have to go in front of the council at the June meeting to be able to handle the funding transfer and the appropriate appropriations for the 5, 10, 10, 10, 65. So I've asked Alan to do the motion. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, I have a motion that's been prepared by our town auditor, Tom Tracy. The motion is to request the town council to appropriate and transfer from the fiscal year 2021 community preservation funds, which should total $2,600,000. Transfer the following funds: 5% or $130,000 for the administrative expense of the Community Preservation Committee, 10% to the Affordable Housing Reserve, which would be approximately $260,000, 10% to the Historical Preservation Reserve, again, about $260,000, 10% to the Open Space Recreation Reserve, $260,000, and 65% to the undesignated fund balance, which would be $1,690,000.
May I have a second, please?
I second.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
That John? I'm sorry. Was that John that seconded?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure, John.
On the 5% administrative, the dollar number, Alan, you read that, you know, it was the 5% or a certain dollar amount. I assume that that means that that's just the approximate amount. It's not, those are not alternatives, 5% or that dollar amount.
No, these are the amounts that Mr. Tracy supplied, showing the percentage and in parentheses the dollar amount. So
Yes.
that's all I'm reading, you know.
Okay.
It's not approximate. The number's been supplied by the town auditor.
Right.
Okay, and that's based on the $2,350,000 or the
$2,600,000.
Okay.
If you see,
So the 10% amounts are obviously $260,000 and 5% would be $130,000.
Thank you.
The percentage match by the state is an estimate because right now that's what they propose that they'll have.
Well, if you look at the bottom of the form that Tom provided that I sent just before the meeting, it says estimated revenue for the CPA surcharge and for the state revenue. But, you know, Tom is pretty conservative and pretty thorough in what he does, but that's where we stand right now, John. I assume, knowing what's going on with the town budgets, there may be adjustments down the road, but we'll be notified by that. You know, once we close the books on June 30th, we will have to make a report to the council in terms of what we've done this year and what we spent money on to date, you know, for the fiscal year 20. And we'll probably, I'm sure, be working on updating us as much as possible. Does that answer your
I
question?
appreciate the clarification. Thanks.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, may I then have a roll call vote again, Lene?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Elodia,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Alan,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Maria, Bob,
Yes.
Mark,
Mark?
Mark is muted.
I'm not muting him.
I think he's having a connection. Well, it sounded like he started to talk, but
He's saying give us a thumbs.
He gave the thumbs up, yeah.
okay. Jason,
Yes.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so this evening, Lene was terrific in sending out the materials that we've been working with now for several months. Avery is already here tonight. I'm not sure. Is Jen coming in, Avery?
Yep, she's here.
Now, Jen, I'm sorry, you just popped up on my screen. And, you know, Lene had sent a bunch of materials out. Susan was kind enough to look at some information from Hingham that was also forwarded to you that was pretty interesting. So given that Jen and Avery are both here right now, I think we'll allow them to do their presentation. And then we can have questions after. Leo, did you have a question?
No.
I see you flashing, so I'm not
Oh,
sure.
no, no, I'm good.
So Sam, how will you do screen share now for Jen and Avery to be able to do this?
Just Avery. Avery's got the PowerPoint.
Avery, do you see the share screen button on your thing?
I do. It says host has disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, hold on, let me fix that.
And
You know what, I'm just gonna make you a co-host so you can do that.
Perfect. You can trust her.
I'm sorry, this is the first time for us to have this meeting with all this technology. The council meeting didn't go too well the other night either.
Okay, how about now?
All right, let's see.
Great, terrific.
This looks good. Can everyone see the mountains?
yeah,
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Just get this up and running. Is that, can everyone see that? Is that big enough?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on.
Let me see.
All right, good. Well, we're glad to be here at your very first Zoom meeting. Technology is, you know, wonderful when it works. So fingers crossed that we'll be able to do what we hope we were going to do tonight. It's nice to see all your faces or hear your voices after, you know, a number of months of taking a bit of a hiatus on the project and now trying to resurface and regroup. And we wanted to just go over the next steps really, but then we want to focus your time on that worksheet that we had sent out. Did everyone have a chance to, I can only see some of you now because the PowerPoint's so big, but I'm hoping everyone had a chance to go through that worksheet that we gave you. Is that a fair? You give me a thumbs up if you were able to do that.
Yes.
Okay, that's awesome. Good. That will help our conversation a lot that you did that ahead of time. Avery, can you forward to the next slide? So tonight we want to go through a tentative revised schedule that we've been talking about with Elodia and Lene, and we think could work to get you to your ultimate public hearing in September, which was the original date we talked about. So we think that even with a couple months of a lapse in, the project, we think we're able to hopefully still keep everything on track in terms of the end goal. So I think that's good news, as long as you are happy with the revised schedule that we'll show you in a moment. We also wanted, associated with the schedule, of course, is the engagement plan, and how will we go forward with engagement given the health crisis and the fact that we're all social distancing still, and we get to see each other's homes now. So that's I guess that's one benefit of these remote meetings and social distancing, but it makes engagement trickier than normal. So we have some ideas we wanted to run by you and see if you agreed that this was a good approach. Then Avery's going to share with you some of the preliminary feedback that we're getting from the survey. It's still live, but we wanted to give you a snapshot of what we've heard so far. And also, I think you've already gotten the focus group summary and hopefully been able to review that. That was a little while ago, you probably got that, but Avery's just going to present a little bit of the findings of that as well. And then we're going to focus the rest of the time with you on the discussion activity and going through your responses to the worksheet. So let me dive into the schedule now. Avery, if you could forward that slide. Yeah. So this is what we've already done leading up to the CPC meeting. And you remember as well as I do sort of we started the schedule here in January, but really the work started in the fall. And the public forum #1, January 29th, and then focus groups in March. And then the project paused for a couple of months, and now we're here trying to regroup. But in the meantime, the online survey has been live, and so we've been getting some feedback around that. Next. So going forward, what we'd like to propose is launching a new, sort of reviving the project website. We think that it hasn't gotten as much. Avery can go over the statistics of the number of the activity on that, but we think it hasn't gotten as much use as it could. And we have some ideas that Elodie and Lene have been working with us and Bang the Table. We've had a few meetings, and Lene got a training, I think, with Avery and the Bang the Table folks, and I think Elodia sat in on that too the other day. So we think we have some ideas on how to refresh that website and hopefully push that again, so that people in this time of not being able to have in-person meetings, that we can really push the engagement. There's a number of tools that we can activate on that site within the subscription that Avery will go over a bit more. And what we're proposing is that we would essentially push hard on that website, and the survey would go through the end of May, so really just a few more days on the survey. Then we would launch this kind of revised version of the website and do a webinar that we can talk a little bit more about at the end of June, and really try to push engagement between now and the beginning of July. And so what we're proposing is that we collect as much further feedback as we can until July 9th, and then we'd review everything that we heard from the first forum and the survey and the focus groups, and then everything that we hear between now and the end of the outreach time period. We would do a summary of all that engagement, and then we would want to meet with you again in July. We proposed, it looks like July 23rd, but it's possibly that it's the 16th, so we can pin down that July date, but the idea would be to meet with you next in July and really review everything that we heard in preparation for determining what should be in the first draft of the plan. We don't want to write the first draft of the plan without you really weighing in and being able to absorb, like we will do, everything that we've heard so far. And then we would work on the plan in August, we would give it to you by August 10th, the first draft, and then give you about 10 days or so to really review it and get some comments back. And then we could meet with you in late August. Hopefully that date works for everybody, but I think that was one of the original dates that we had in our schedule. And then we could revise the draft plan based on your feedback in late August and post it for public comment. And then your public hearing could stay on track on September 17th. So that's what we were hoping for. Lene and Elodia really wanted to see if we could stay on track despite the past few months and the holdup. And so this is aggressive to some extent, but in another way, I think because it's all virtual engagement, in some ways, maybe it's a little easier for folks to find time for these meetings. And so hopefully that's the case, but certainly let us know what you think of that schedule. And maybe let's go forward into the next section, which is the engagement. We can come back to that project website, but to the schedule. But what I want to do is make sure you understand the ideas around the project website so that when we talk about a relaunch, you'll have a better sense of, well, what are you talking about? You know, what would be able to revive the website, and what have we been able to do so far with the website? So Avery, why don't you take over on this piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of just a snapshot of what's on the website right now. I don't know how recently any of you have been on there, but we have, these are all different project pages. This is kind of what's shown on the main homepage.
Oh, there you are. You cut out for a second, Avery. Why don't you repeat that?
Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Hi, Avery.
So these are the main project pages. There's an information page, a page with the link to take the survey, a page that has information about the meeting in the box tool, which unfortunately, because of the health crisis, I think there was originally a plan to try to use that tool and bring it to local groups and maybe some committees and boards, and kind of use that as a discussion tool with those groups, and that just kind of went by the wayside. So that's not very active. We have some, updates and information about the first forum and focus groups, events that we've already had. The project resources page is, just provides a bunch of information. There are background planning documents. There's the resource profiles that we put together, the summaries of engagement events that have already happened. That's just a dump of information that people can peruse. And then we have the mapping tool where people can drop pins and leave comments about different potential project ideas, needs, resources in the community related to CPA. And one thing I will say is that, so our site, one of the topics we've been talking about a lot is that the site requires registration to participate. Anybody can see any of the content that's on here. And there's a quick poll also, I think, on the About page that asks people, kind of similar to the pom-pom jar activity that we did at the public forum, that's asking people, what their biggest priorities are in terms of the 4 categories, and that anybody can participate in. But any of the other tools, so like the Map Your Ideas or the other tools that I'll explain in a second, people have to register. And we think that's been potentially a deterrent to some of the activity, but we have been working with the Bang the Table, their tech people, and trying to figure out a way to, make that a little bit easier and a little bit clearer for people, to explain why registration is required and assure people that, their information will not be shared and all of that. So here's just a little bit of information about activity on the site so far. There have been 797 unique visitors to the site, so that's people coming with a unique IP address. Oh, I have this here twice.
A different number.
I don't know. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what those different numbers are, but I think that this one is correct, the 797, and the 32 is the registered participant. So that's the people that could leave, a comment on the map tool. I think this 599 might be an old one from an old
I thought you had originally said in the meeting the other day, Avery, that there were close to 1,200 site visitors, if I recall. So I really would appreciate if you would check those numbers later on.
Yep, there's several, as Linnea and Elodia saw the other day on the meeting that we had, they have several different indicators of activity, and it's a little bit confusing. So I think that's where some of those numbers are a little bit funky, but I can double check and get back to you guys, but I'm pretty sure this 797 is correct.
Okay.
And Avery, if I could just interrupt, while we're doing the activity, why don't you
check it?
Why don't you check then, and then that would be great, and then you can report the accurate number tonight.
Yep. So this information is pretty helpful about how people are accessing the website. Most people are going directly to the site, so they're, they see the URL somewhere and they're directly typing it in, or they've gone already and they're revisiting through their browser history. A lot of people are going through social media links or the government website. Referrals is links from other sources, so if there are other websites that are not government or social media, I'm not really sure where those are coming from. But it is really interesting to note that the email blasts are not working very well. I think there were only like 6 people who had visited the site through email. And so that's just interesting to know and helpful to know in terms of outreach strategy, like what is working well and what isn't. So when we're thinking about outreach, maybe pushing the social media and seeing if we can give the website more visibility on the town's website and things like that might be helpful. So here is what we're thinking for new content. We have talked about creating, so the engagement that we're trying to get at is we were supposed to have a second in-person community forum, kind of similar to the first one we had. And because we can't do that, we wanted to provide the same kind of presentation that we would at a forum. And this is something we've done with other projects, and it's worked really well, where we record a video that has some background information on the project and about CPA, gives a bit of information about what we've heard so far from the community and through the events we've hosted already. And kind of sets the stage and gives some information and some context. And then along with that, we would post new content on the website and ask people to give feedback using that video, as kind of a guiding tool and a background information tool. So we've talked about having us, JM Goldson, our team, create a 20 to 30 minute video that we can post on the website. And we've also been talking about doing a webinar, a live webinar. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then, as you guys all know, we've drafted some, preliminary evaluation criteria and goals. So that will be the primary content that we'll be posting on the website to ask people to give feedback on. And so we've been thinking about creating kind of how we have each of these pages with different content on them. We would create a new page for each of the categories and have those goals posted on those pages, and one for the evaluation criteria, and have different tools in there with questions and ways for the community to give feedback. So these are some of the tools that we are thinking about using, and I'll give you some examples in a second. We have a forums tool, which is really about kind of guided discussion. Usually there's a prompt, some sort of question prompt, and then registered participants can leave comments. They can respond to other people's comments that have already been left. It's a really great way to kind of foster that discussion type, virtual discussion on the website. There's also just a comments tool where instead of being able to leave, respond to somebody else's comment that they've already posted, it's just kind of like a comment box. People can leave generic comments, and that we're kind of thinking to use in conjunction with the Q&A tool that we already have up there, so that if people have generic comments, or if we're asking them to just leave comments on a goal or create evaluation criteria, we can talk about what we think might be best. I'm thinking the forums is probably best for getting feedback on the goals and evaluation criteria. And then the comments is more of a generic comment box that we can have on the site. The other potential tool is ideas, where people can post ideas, and again, other participants can either like that idea. I believe they can also comment on it. The one cool thing about this is people can add pictures. And then there's also the quick polls, which we already have one up there, but if we wanted to, that's an easy way to ask a multiple choice question, get some feedback pretty quick and easy. And again, that one does not require registration. So that's a really good tool to use if there's feedback that we want to get, just from anybody who, maybe doesn't want to register on the site. And then the last tool that we were talking about potentially using is we can use these news categories or who's listening tool, which the terminology of the tool type doesn't really matter. But what's important for you to know is that that's a way for us to provide an introduction to the community about who's listening to all of this feedback. Often it's an introduction of each of you, the people that are sitting on the committee, and maybe a little blurb about us and our consultant team. So here's some examples. This is the forums. This is just kind of what it looks like. These are examples from other projects. So this is an example of, a question prompt, and here several people have posted comments, and then down here, this is where people are responding to a comment that's already been posted. This is what it looks like. This is a string of, multiple, here's the prompt, and then if you click on this go to discussion button, you go into this kind of view where all of the comments are strung below. So that's the forum idea. Here's the ideas tool. Again, it looks very similar. Usually there's some sort of description or introduction up at the top, and then here there would be directions about, how to use the tool, and then people can leave their comments. As you can see here, someone can like that comment or that idea. And one thing we did clarify is that a registered user can only like that comment once. It's not like you can stack up likes and kind of skew the results. It's kind of like liking a status on Facebook. If you click it, you like it. If you unclick it, it goes away. Here's an example of the comments tool. It's also called guest book. But it's basically just like this. It's just a string of comments where people can, share their input and their ideas, but there's not really that engagement of back and forth communication between users. And then this is an example of the quick poll. This is the one that we have on the website right now. And then this is the who's listening, or the introduction to the committee and who's taking all of this information in. So we could do it just like this with a photo and a short description. We could also just do descriptions. We could also do a generic description of what the CPC is. We can kind of talk about how exactly we would want that to work if it's something that we want to use. So this is a little bit more about the webinar idea. So using that the video recording, the informational video recording that I talked about that we're planning on doing, we want to, Elodia has been working on putting this together to create a live webinar that could then also be streamed later on. So it would involve streaming that informational video that's pre-recorded, but then also having a half an hour to an hour afterwards with a panel, which we could be part of. I'm assuming Elodia and Lene would be part of. We can talk more about who you envision for being on that panel. But that's just another way to push visibility of the website and get the word out there. And then we can also advertise that webinar on the website so that if anyone visits the website, then they can go participate in that, that live Q&A type setting.
Come up and see the picture.
And then we can also post, once that recording is made, we can post that on the website as well so that everyone has access to that Q&A session. So the last thing I'll say here is what will be really important is all of the outreach for this. I think that's one of the things. Yes, potentially registration is a barrier. We're hoping that the tweaks that we've made in the settings will help make that process easier, and adding a little bit more content really visible content about why registration is something that's required. We're hoping that will help. And I know that a lot of outreach effort has already happened. And unfortunately, it hasn't gotten quite the result that we hope. But I do just want to stress the point that this is going to take a group effort, especially because based on the schedule that Jen just talked about, there would be about 4 weeks where this content would be up and running on the site with the opportunity for the community to give feedback before we would need to close things down to then, do our analysis and have that inform the rest of the plan. And so I know that right before coronavirus really hit hard, I had talked about an idea of, and I know that it circulated once at least, of having each person, each committee member sign up for 1 or 2 outreach commitments. And I think that reinstating that might be a really good idea, having everybody sign up for and commit to, one outreach method, whether it's posting on your own personal social media or on, if you're part of a group that has a social media page or a website, or if there's, you're part of a group that has a newsletter that they'd be willing to put it, include a little blurb about the website in their newsletter, but just something that everybody is doing, or whether it's word of mouth, just calling friends, getting the word out about this kind of relaunch and new content on the website, and the fact that it's, really important and, important to the process to get this feedback. So with that, I think I would like to pause there and just kind of hear what you guys think about this. If you have any questions or thoughts about this idea.
Well, one thought I had was that at some point along the line, it might be very interesting for several of us or a couple of us to get together and make presentations specific to the areas that are funded, just so that people can, and not a forum, I guess, rather than just a presentation and people watch and then they go away. Something where people could actually ask questions. So it would be talking about housing, talking about historic, and there'd need to be some preparation so that we would have a couple of us who could, between us or among us, could answer the questions as fully as possible. Mm-hmm. The other question I had, there are a variety of next door neighborhood forums. Mm-hmm. Watertown next door. I think there's several Watertown next door. And it really helps if you have a lost cat, which we don't. But I'm wondering whether or not the conversation threads you were talking about would be that kind of immediate and back and forth, and how we could make them interesting enough so that people would reach out to them to hear other people's comments and kind of get a conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one key piece is, carefully crafting the question prompts so that they are insightful and hopefully engaging. But yes, the idea is that it would be, pretty interactive and quick and immediate. As soon as someone writes something, it's posted. But the other idea that could be helpful is to have a facilitator. So some Lene and Elodia both just were given admin accounts to the Facebook page as well. And so having someone like Lene, pop in and facilitate discussion and respond to people's comments and say, thank you for your input, and ask follow-up questions, that can help kind of keep that conversation going. We've done that, and we can also do that as well as consultants. And we just want to make sure that our title is correct so that people know who it is that's responding. Right now, my name on the website is Project Consultant. So we can definitely, between the two of us, the three of us, we can collaboratively do that. you guys could register as members of the CPC and also pop in and leave comments and try to help things go. I think that's a great idea, and that's a really good way to kind of keep the conversation engaging. It is important to find the balance between, letting the community speak and not overpowering it with too many voices and trying to kind of lead the conversation. But I think it's definitely doable.
Well, that would be a good problem to have if we were overwhelmed.
Yes.
It would be, yes, at least from this point, if we could get a lot of active questions, people I'm sure are interested in knowing, asking questions. We want to engage them so they can be thinking about their projects that they might want to be presenting. So, asking questions, we don't all have to have the answers. We can get back to them. But just a way of getting people to think about what projects they might have that they would like to submit.
Right. Yeah, and I think one thing that I will say, which, it obviously hasn't been decided in any way, shape, or form, but one big reason why Lene and Elodia asked to have a training session with the Bang the Table representative that I've been working with is so that potentially the site can be carried forward as the central platform, and these kinds of conversations can continue to happen even after the plan is developed. And I think that's you mentioning this idea of creating forums around the different category topics, that's something that definitely can take place later on. And I think the discussion and the idea generation of different projects, and there will always be questions. So those kinds of conversations, hopefully will be carried forward as well.
Thank you.
Hi, Avery. Can I chime in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So to follow up with what Susan was saying, I think since you've created these new tools, I think as a suggestion, actually, could I just make a comment that anyone that's not on a committee could mute themselves, because I hear dogs and I hear paper.
Yep. Thank you, Maria.
And I'm afraid that, what's that?
Yay, Maria.
And I'm afraid to unmute myself or mute myself because I can't unmute myself. So I'm being very quiet in my little office. So Susan, I think since the Goldson team made these new tools, one suggestion for what you're proposing would be start a conversation in one of those new tools. I forget which one it is now. Like start like maybe it's even one of the questions from our worksheet, and start driving some traffic there. And then if enough interest comes, you could always set up something, meeting in I don't know, in person, I suppose. But that would be my suggestion on that. And then backing up to your presentation, I am pleased to see that we're not losing too much ground in the schedule. And I thank you for thinking creatively. I love the webinar idea. That's what everyone is switching to. I have some critical training to do for work that has to be completed by the end of June, and I have no choice but to do it virtually for a large group of people, or a good sized group of people. And and it can be done effectively. So I think that the webinar is the way to go. I think people are getting more and more accustomed to these kind of tools, and this is our first one, and although some of us are familiar with how to use it, it's a little different when you're running the meeting. So we'll get better at that, I'm sure. So I think that's good. I think the dates are good. I'm happy to hear, we'd still have the plan done in September. And I like the ideas of the new tools. And I will reconsider. I had signed up for a meeting in a box, and although some of my neighbors are already starting to have small parties, I will reconsider that with maybe a smaller group for my commitment.
Yeah, and I can, with that idea of having everybody commit to some outreach effort, I think that I can kind of repurpose that sheet and design it a little bit more to cater to this new set of content and new objectives for this next phase. And I can circulate that, next week or even potentially tomorrow to get that moving if that's something that everyone feels like is doable and everybody can commit to. I think that would be really helpful to push the visibility of the site.
And another idea, if other folks on the committee are getting used to doing Zoom on their own or Skype or whatever platform you're using, you can have little meetings like this with your, like, just like we were saying before, neighbors, book groups, friends at any religious organizations or whatever groups you're involved with. You can do a mini meeting, invite 4, 5, 6, I don't know, 7, however many you're comfortable, to share a Zoom meeting with you and go through the meeting in a box if you want to do that. I think that's something, especially, I think more and more people are becoming comfortable. I know, on the weekends, we'll often get our whole family together on Zoom to just say hi to each other. And I don't know if other people are starting to do that too on the committee, but that's another idea, to use that meeting in a box. And yeah, I think we could redesign that to make it kind of catch it up to where we are now in the process.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a little get together every Saturday. So yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, somebody else organizes it, but it's not that hard. But I've always thought you only had 40 minutes for the free version of Zoom.
Yeah, you can redo it somehow. I don't know how that works because we have a subscription in my office, but I think people like somehow redo it after 40 minutes. I don't know how exactly it works. So you can go longer.
Okay.
Before we go too far down this road, I really want to go back to the beginning of a critical problem that we have, which is the fact that if people do not register for this website, they cannot participate in doing anything on the website. They can view things, and we have a very, very low registration, 32 people registered. Part of the problem was there were 2 different registration processes, which drove me crazy. And Bang the Table supposedly is updating their system, but it's not going to help us right now. And this is a huge concern for me. Normally, when you go in on a site, I signed up for something today, you put your name, your email address, and then you get the 9 boxes, pick out the stop signs, click on the boxes with stop signs, and you're in. That's not the process here. And we really need to figure out a way to encourage people to register, or we're going to have, again, nothing to show for all this. The other thing, Avery, is could you go back to the slide that you had with the different avenues of where people were clicking onto the site? It had email and the town website, because I really am curious as to how those numbers are reached.
Yeah, I can show you or send you the analytics, and I might need to ask Katie from Bang the Table to explain it a little bit more to me. It generates a number. I think it might be some sort of weighted, but
sends out an email, or I send out an email. I'm putting all the links in there that people can click on to go to the survey, to go to the website, to go to this. So how can you track where that is coming from? I'm not getting that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can track where the URL, like if someone clicks on a URL in an email, they can track that that's the source of that generation.
I'd like to know those things, but the other thing is that, my head was spinning after this meeting with all these different options. Lene and I talked some more after that. Where somebody can leave a comment is one thing. If we have a forum going on that people can go back and forth, you can either have it monitored. We could either monitor it before people can leave comments, which I don't think we're going to get a Facebook-like situation where we've seen some things. I don't know how many people are on Facebook, but it can really go off the rails. I'm not suspecting that. But remember, anything that we keep adding, we have to think about who is going to be active in participating in this, because it can't all fall to Lene, it can't all fall to Avery, nor to me. So these have to be somewhat thoughtful about what we're doing. And then the final thing I want to say is this is a very tentative schedule, because right now we do not know how the town is going to proceed. As we've heard through the memo, key meetings come first. And there are a lot of key meetings going on, such as town council meetings, certainly town council subcommittee meetings, the school building committee meetings are going to be starting up, zoning, even the historical commission. Anybody that is on a timeline where they have to give approval to something bumps us. So for example, we cannot meet on our regular Thursdays because right now the licensing board will always take precedent over us. We were able to snag this date because we saw it become available and we just grabbed it. And again, where I said in my opening statement, we're going to have to be flexible because as we try to meet, Lene and I are going to try to grab a date. The webinar that we talked about, I had this idea, talked with Lene about it, asked her to call Helen Chattel over at the cable station because she's terrific and very imaginative. She loved the idea and talked about, doing some clips from the video that Jen and Avery would do as teasers to get people to watch the webinar. And the webinar can be filmed during the day. We don't have to go through the rigmarole of trying to find a night to be able to do that. So that can be done during daytime hours. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility. I know this is a lot of information to absorb all at one time, but I'm asking you to really reflect on this because, we've been really brainstorming to see how to go forward. And it is still extremely aggressive, I think, to try to get everything done by September, depending upon dates. It'll be interesting to hear what the town is going to do June 1st and what they are considering opening. So I just wanted to add those comments. If anybody else has comments, I can't see you all right now, so please just speak.
Yeah, thanks. I think that that's a really good point, to bring up that it's very flexible and we're going to continue to just stay in constant contact with each other and, send updates about the schedule and how things are looking. I would really like to move on just because we have more content to get through. But if you guys have other thoughts about those tools or questions, feel free to send questions to Lene or follow up after the meeting. We'd be happy to share more information about that.
Great.
I wonder if I can just throw out an idea, and I guess it doesn't have to be discussed now, but for those CPC meetings where like this, it's not a public forum, I just want to throw out the idea of whether, particularly the people who have regular employment could do a daytime meeting. An hour, 2 hours, to give us more flexibility about meeting dates. But I just wanted to put that out there while I could do it regardless of the open meeting law, and people can comment whenever.
John, just so you know, I did ask that of the administration and they told me that we have to adhere to the evening hours, which is a little crazy in my mind right now, given so many people are working from home. But right now, we still had to try to stay close to our scheduled hours, our 7 to 9 slot. It was tough to get a new date. So I don't know if there's going to be any flexibility on that. I have been asking and asking and asking because I've gone to other communities and there have been 3 meetings back to back. I sat in meetings one evening at a town. I went from 7 to almost 11 o'clock. So I'm not quite sure why this is the standard. I'm hoping it's going to open up after June 1st. Mark alluded to that last night in the town council meeting. So believe me, I'm on this on an almost every other day basis. But it would be good to know, because it's Maria, Bob, and Jason, if you do have any flexibility on your hours and you could, get that to Lene later. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we're really scrambling to do anything we can.
All right.
Oh. Go ahead, whoever was going to say. All right, well, I'll just speak up then. That'd be fine. It really varies for me. There's certain commitments that I do have during the day, but I feel like this is a very controlling thing that there's only one account for the whole town. I'd be happy to write a letter, or we have it's just absurd to me that only one meeting can happen at a time. I don't know. It just seems from where I work to see this, we're trying to work with like 2 hands tied behind our back and our ankles tied together or something.
I didn't understand it either, Maria, because the Zoom meeting can be recorded. So there is an actual recording, but they have tied everything in with the cable station So that Sam is part here as our, co-host, our kind of our facilitator, our techie. And then he records it through cable and the Zoom. And believe me, I find it a bit confusing, but I know other communities have similar restrictions, and they were holding meetings on Friday nights, which many people in that town did not care for at all. So I'm just saying, we're going to have to ride this wave a little bit, figure it out, and you'll get emails from Lene saying, "Can you do this meeting?" So we're working as fast as we can. I'd like to go on. So
Thank you, Elodia.
You're welcome.
So I just want to give you a brief, I don't want to spend too much time going into the weeds of, there's a lot of comments on the survey and a lot of feedback. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. We will be doing, as Jen said, a full aggregated summary of engagement. But I just wanted to kind of reiterate where the development of the draft goals and evaluation criteria that you reviewed came from. So they came from feedback from the first public forum, from the stakeholder focus groups, from the online community survey thus far, and from website contributions thus far, although at this point, as you know, those are pretty minimal. So just to give you a sense, I think the biggest takeaway from the survey is who is responding and are those people representative of the community. So as of the 26th, there were 390 responses. As you can see, most of them were at the beginning, shortly after we launched the survey. There's been a little bit more activity, but not much compared to the early, the first month or so. So looking at the demographics, which again, keep in mind that not everybody responded to these questions.
Do you have a form that you're showing, Avi, right now? Are you showing something or just chatting? Because I can't, if you have a...
It's just,
She's
you
showing
can't see my screen?
PowerPoint.
I can't see your screen.
We can.
I can.
I can.
I don't.
Claudia, are you in grid view or speaker presenter view in Zoom? I wonder if
I can change that. I'm seeing, you are viewing Avery Wolf's screen, but I'm not seeing any presentation.
Oh, but everyone else can see it?
Yes.
Now I can.
Elodie, if you go to view options in the drop down and you select side-by-side mode, that might be what you need to do.
Okay, I'll try, Jason. Go continue. I'll just keep listening so I can find it. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
So I just did a little comparison here of, what the demographic responses were for the survey, and then looking at the 2018 American Community Survey 5-year estimates, which is the most recent data available. So there's definitely an overrepresentation of people who identify as white. The biggest group that I think is underrepresented, or biggest groups, is the Asian population and the Hispanic and Latinx populations. So that's just something to keep in mind, especially in terms of the outreach that we're about to do for the website relaunch and that new content. Obviously, there's not a ton of time left on the schedule we've made for the survey, but in terms of the outreach strategy and putting out this sign up for all of you to help with that outreach over the next few weeks, leading up to the new content on the website, how can we try to reach those populations and bolster more input from those people? Similarly with age, there's an underrepresentation of young adults. Youth and children is pretty, it's pretty common to not have very much response there. But yeah, if we could get some high schoolers, young adults, young families, that's another group of people. And then to some degree, older seniors as well, but that's also pretty regular, especially for an online platform, to have a slightly underrepresented population there.
And can I just ask a quick question on the race ethnicity? How much of the issue we're seeing with lack of representation for the Asian and the Hispanic population, how much of that do people think is a language barrier?
Well, the population, Hispanic and Asian population are only about little under 10% each in town. So that's the first thing. I don't honestly know, Jen.
One idea, Avery, I don't know if you're going to lead this discussion. I don't mean to steal your win, but
Oh, it's okay.
one idea we've worked on when a community is not doing translation of all the materials, which can get, very costly, and we have had some success reaching out to sort of ambassadors of those communities, for lack of a better word, not that they call themselves that, but just thinking about your strategy and how you're reaching out and who you're reaching out to. If there are any groups in town that you think could help us tap into those populations to get more feedback. Elodia said they're only about 10%. She's right, it's about 9% for each of those groups, but we're only seeing about 1% responding to of the survey respondents and only about 2%. So it's, our point is just that it's underrepresented. We're not surprised by that, but we think it's something that is worthwhile for you to think about if you want to try to get a more representative sample.
What percentage of people answered the demographic question?
Do you have that offhand, Avery?
I think I do have it. Let me see.
That's a good question, Lene, because a small percentage might have only responded with those questions.
I don't think I have that off the top of my head, but I can look at that when I look at the numbers of the website as well. So again, looking at tenure, there's an underrepresentation of rental households. So that's another thing to think about if there's, a way to try to reach renters, distributing information. I know, Elodia, I think you said at one point that you had tried to distribute information to like rental complexes and had difficulty with that.
Well, I actually did
Complexes, yes.
the information to the managers of those residences, the property managers, and they distributed it through their means, whether they had a newsletter or sending emails out to tenants. So we didn't really see any bump in response to the survey or website engagement. So I guess it didn't really work.
Yeah. It might be worth, with this new content, it might be worth trying again. I mean, the effort is, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it might be worth it. That's just, again, something to think about in terms of if you want to try to get a more representative sample of the population. Again, with household income, there's an underrepresentation of the lower income households and mid-income. So that's, just another thing to think about if there are other resources or avenues that you could try to spread word and do that outreach to try to reach those populations. So the one thing that I did just want to pull out from the survey is this overall category prioritization in terms of, which category or which topic is most important to you, I think is what the question was. So it's just interesting to notice open space and passive recreation came out on top. And you'll notice that these percentages don't add up to 100. So I think people could select multiple. Active recreation came out pretty high. Community housing and active recreation were very similar, historic preservation. And then there were some people that said they weren't sure, or it depends, or it was hard to decide. Mostly that was people saying, I would want more information about the specific projects. It might be case dependent, that kind of thing. Similarly, I just wanted to pull, this is from the first forum, just to show a comparison there. Pretty similar. Open space came out first. Community housing was higher, and outdoor recreation did end up lower, with historic preservation also a little bit lower. And I hope you guys all did get a chance to look at the focus group results. These were just some of the key takeaways from the discussions we had with key stakeholders during our focus groups in March, right before all of the stay-at-home orders started. So for community housing, there's a desire to support opportunities for a variety of specified needs. I know that's kind of vague. There are more details in the summary. just because there were so many different points and needs that were brought up. But I think that really plays into this idea of, wanting to identify what those needs are and have a good understanding of that. Support projects that meet identified development and housing priorities, again, kind of similar. Historic preservation, really focusing on adaptive reuse and expanding public use of specifically abandoned or underutilized structures and properties and buildings. And then also the investment in preservation of existing resources. There was definitely a lot of discussion about making sure that these resources are open to the public and available to the public, both in the focus groups and from the survey. For open space and recreation.
Excuse me, this is Gideon. I think that Elodia's screen is being shared, not yours. I see Elodia's screen right now.
Can't get her screen at all.
Oh, that's weird, because I see Avery's screen.
I see
Thank God.
Now I see Avery's screen.
Thank you. And Jen, did you have a question? I saw your hand up because you, yes, no?
Who are you asking?
Well, this was Gideon that interrupted, but sorry, I just wanted to.
Jason's hand up before. I didn't know if he had a question. Thank you. Okay, continue, Avery. Sorry.
So for, open space and recreation, integrating, this is one piece that came up that I wanted to point out, integrating community access and passive recreation opportunities. This was really a discussion about the limited availability of, and leftover land that is open space or could be, repurposed and recreated into new open space. And that was just one thing that came up in the focus group, specifically talking about providing access to whatever open space areas there are and natural areas. Capitalizing on underutilized or small vacant properties to create new open space, kind of recreating open space, since there's relatively little natural open space still left in the community. Seeking partnerships was one thing that really came up, talking about working with neighboring communities, other organizations, potentially with DCR. So that's something that, we can talk about more. And I'm sure you saw in the worksheet. And then investing in protection for existing resources in open space areas, really capitalizing on what exists and protecting what is there. This is another big piece that really came out of the focus groups, was this idea of creating guiding principles, which we then turned into this evaluation criteria. So these are just some of the things that came up we asked specifically at the end of the focus groups for people to provide some ideas of what those guiding principles or overarching standards or criteria should be when you guys are considering project applications. And so these are some of the things that come up. These numbers just indicate if there were repetitions or, similar wording. So these, they kind of go in order of how popular they were, how frequently they came up as people shared their ideas. So this is just a really big piece that shaped that evaluation criteria. And now we can move on to that piece. I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Yeah, and you're going to bring up the worksheet, right?
Yes, I can do that.
Yeah. Can you bring up the worksheet and also do the research that we?
Yes, I have my split screen here.
Okay,
so.
good. That's great.
A question before we get further away from the overview of the process. Is there any way that if an emergency request such as the rental housing assistance came to us, or that for example the town wanted to make such a proposal to us, that we could consider it before the September goal of getting our application process done, or is that not possible?
There's no legal reason that you couldn't consider something right now. It's more a policy decision on the part of the CPC.
Sagamore, and Tony Palumbo wrote a letter to Stuart Sagamore and myself, and Stuart replied, and we do have to get a plan done and an application process done. That's what we're legally mandated to do. we are not here to jump the gun. The town has some resources to do what they want to do, but we are not here directing the town what to do, John.
Or I wasn't implying that.
Pardon me?
I wasn't implying that.
I can barely hear you. I'm sorry.
I was not implying that we would be directing anybody. I was asking if we could react if the town or any other organization made a proposal to us on an emergency basis. I'm not saying I'm for that or not for it. I just wanted to find out if that's a possibility.
Well, Stuart did reply to that, and he did say the mandate is to do the plan and have an application process.
Okay, but I guess Jen was saying that that's not a legal requirement to.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the text right now of the statute. So if you want to look it up later, it's section 5B1. It just says that you need to study the needs, possibilities, and resources of the town. Consult with existing boards. As part of the study, hold one or more public information hearings. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything about the sequencing of that in relationship to when you can or can't take applications.
Well, I mean, it's a theoretical question that I'm asking. It's a hypothetical because nobody's come to us. So
Right.
I just wanted to find out about it, and I appreciate the information. And I am also, like everyone else, probably eager to get to the worksheet.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not advocating that it's good policy to jump the gun. I'm just saying that in the statute, it doesn't specifically say you have to have a plan before you can take any applications.
Okay, thanks.
I'll be happy to, I have this letter from Stuart, which I'm happy to read right now, that was sent to Tony as well as to me. And he said, as you know, the CPA is not set up as a program for emergencies. It was created to be a funding source for long-term capital needs for quality of life projects that normally don't make it into the regular city budget. The normal federal, state, and city budgets are the ones that take care of everyday needs, both reoccurring and those of an emergency nature. That being said, there is something covered by the CPA legislation that can be helpful with the current situation, and that is the ability to provide rental assistance to income-eligible residents. A number of communities are looking at partnering with local housing organizations now to help renters who are in need. But the process to approve those proposals would need to follow the normal CPA appropriation guidelines, which require a recommendation by the CPC, followed by the approval of the City Council. There is no provision in the CPA legislation to do an emergency appropriation that bypasses the normal procedure, as CPA is not set up to be that type of program. We do recommend that cities looking at these programs find a qualified housing organization to run a rental assistance program. It's complicated and you need professionals to do it. Most cities are not equipped to run these programs on their own. There are many state and federal guidelines that you have to follow, and the devil is in the details. I've attended numerous meetings in other communities. Many communities already have something in place, such as a housing trust, or they have gotten COVID monies through CBDG funding. If you look at the last memo from the manager, Watertown could apply for up to $3.1 million for certain related COVID-19 expenses, and rental housing is one of the things listed there. But this is something that is initiated then by the city, and this is not something under our umbrella right now as I read Stuart's answer to this question.
Elodia, can I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree that there's a lot of need for rental assistance and affordable housing and so forth, but I think there has to be some sort of an intermediary agency that would screen all those applications and be responsible for disseminating the funds in an appropriate manner. We don't have such an organization in Watertown yet. I think Metro West Collaborative out there does something. I don't know if you can get them to just help Watertown people with Watertown money. That would make sense.
Well, Jennifer Van Kampen
Yeah.
did put a program together that she has modified for various communities in the area. Different community, their raft, there's so many different funds that makes your head spin depending upon which community you're in. Newton has CBDG funds. They also appropriated some money, but they already have everything in place. Still trying to get a plan together and get an application process together. So, I just feel like we need to do our job. And if this is an issue, this should be addressed to the town government, not to us right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
So before we move on, can I jump in really quickly? I looked up the information about the questions you guys asked. So for the website, the question was about the number of visitors, unique visitors to the site. As of today, the number is 798 unique visitors. The 1,200 number that Elodia referenced is just all visitors. So that includes repeats of people, from the same IP address. So if I visit the site once today and once tomorrow and 3 times the next day, that number includes all of those repeats, whereas a 798 is just the unique visitors.
Avery, I appreciate that.
Yep. In terms of the demographics for the survey, for race, 248 people responded, age, 257 people, tenure, 250, income, 237. And the total was 390, so.
What was that third category, Avery? I'm sorry.
Household income, tenure.
Household income, okay.
Yeah.
No, the third one, you have race, age.
Tenure.
Thank you.
Rental or ownership.
Yep.
All right, Jen, over to you.
Okay, so what I'd like to do with this worksheet is facilitate a discussion among the CPC members around the questions, but also around the draft criteria first, then the overarching goals, and then the draft goals for each section. And Avery, if you could time us, what I'd like to do is see if we can spend between 10, possibly 15 minutes on each.
On each section?
Yeah, how tight are you, or how strict is it that you need to end the meeting at 9, or can we go over 9?
We can go over a little bit. Can we, Sam?
Yes, you guys can go over 9. However, I'd appreciate it if we didn't go too far past 9.
Thank you.
So why don't we cut it, Avery, can you time us for 10 minutes for each?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, so with the evaluation criteria, you'll see just in general, the way that we structured this is we wanted to throw something out to you based on everything we've heard to date, but knowing that we have more input and feedback that we're getting through the remaining few days of the survey, as well as the next set of weeks that we're going to be pushing engagement. But what we'd like to do is go through the draft of each of these, knowing that this is not your final say by a long shot. What we'd like to do is put this out for public input. And so what you're really deciding today is not what will go in the final plan, but you're deciding and giving us guidance on what would you want to change or add or remove or clarify before we share this more broadly on the website and ask for public feedback. So it's a different question than asking you, what do you want in the plan? Does that generally make sense in terms of an approach? I can only see a few people, so just speak up.
Yes.
If you.
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's start with the evaluation criteria. And I'd love to have everyone chime in, because what I'd like to do before we leave, at 9 or shortly after 9, I'd like to get a sense that everybody agrees with at least the direction in terms of what we're asking for more public feedback on. So let me just start with the general evaluation criteria. This would be criteria that you would use when you get in applications and you're trying to decide which ones you want to fund. You would look at the evaluation criteria and make some kind of a judgment. It could be, you could have a sort of a kind of a quantitative weighting system, or you could do it more qualitatively where you just talk through all of these different items. And so the idea is that this evaluation criteria would be the same for all proposals, all applications that come to you, regardless of it, whether it's a historic preservation project or an open space project. You'd want to see the same things. And so these were ideas that we got from the focus groups, but also from things that we've seen other communities use. And so I'll just read, I think there's a few more on the next page. I'll read these 3 first, and then Avery can scroll down. Demonstrate a broad community benefit and/or community building, including opportunity for and likely public use. 2, involve collaboration between multiple partners, entities, or organizations. 3, benefit particularly vulnerable or systematically marginalized populations or underserved areas. Next one, next page. Incorporate components of 2 or more of the CPA eligible categories. Include other sources of funding for at least half of the total project costs, and that could include volunteer labor or material donations, so not just dollars. 6, demonstrate alignment with the goals and priorities identified in other town planning documents. 7, demonstrate public outreach and support. Are there more under this, Avery? 8, support the rehab of underutilized and deteriorated properties or adaptively reuse existing buildings. 9, prevent harm or destruction of existing community resources. And 10, further the goals outlined in the community preservation plan itself. Is that the last one?
Yeah, those are just questions,
great.
follow-up questions.
Yeah, and so we can sort of mix this discussion. Let me read you the questions that are part of this.
I think they start on this page.
Question 1 was for draft criteria number 5 about the half. Doesn't have to be half. It could say many different things. We threw in half to see what you thought of it. So the question is, do you think demonstrating at least half the total project costs are not paid for by CPA is appropriate? Is that an appropriate threshold? Should it be higher or lower, or should you not even look at that? The next question, number 2, if you can scroll to the bottom there. Sometimes projects that align with the Community Preservation Act and town goals will not be supported by the public, or at least it won't seem like it because you'll get a lot of opposition vocally. So how do you think the CPC should weigh or address this kind of conflict when your plans and planning studies and other planning documents and the CPA plan even might support this kind of project, but then you get opposition at your meetings, let's say, or other types of opposition? Number 3, are there any other criteria that you think should be added? So what I'd love to do is, oh, was there another one? I'm sorry.
This number 4 is
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
I'm
how
sorry.
you're describing the criteria and how they're used.
Yeah. So how do you think these criteria can best be used and weighed to inform the CPE's funding decisions? How do you envision that process? Do all criteria have equal weight? Do some have more weight than others? Do you only consider these criteria if you receive more projects than you can fund with the funds you have available at that time? Or do you use it always? And so if we run out of our 10 minutes, because I just spent half the time talking, we can skip that question because you can decide that later. The other questions are more important right now. So I'd like to go down the line to hear from everybody on each segment so that I know I have everybody's voice. So I'm just going to call on people if it's okay. As I see them on the screen, I see Dennis at the top of my screen.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dennis.
I like the first question. When you say question, bullet point number 2, hold it, scroll back down.
This question.
What are examples of multiple partners, entities, or organizations?
Well, you could have something that maybe is an application that a town department puts in, but they have a friends group or other grassroots group supporting and collaborating on the project too, rather than just having it be a town project. That's just a loose example.
I think that also gets at, I mentioned earlier that at the focus groups it came up that there was a desire to see collaboration between various entities. So, potentially working with another town, another community, or potentially with DCR, or like Jen was saying, other organizations, local organizations or groups.
Well, I think, it's almost site-specific in a sense. There's some properties that border Waltham I think we should work with to get. But as far as DCR, I think the town should keep its own projects. So, like I say, it depends. I don't think there's a set answer to say yes for this or no for this. So.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. Do you have any other thoughts on the other criteria?
Number 4. What worries me about number 4 is we don't have a lot of money. And the way, after working in the legislature for 35 years, they're going to be cutting bad. They're down $4.5 to $5 billion. So we think they're going to fully, this 11%, and they got mental health problems and this and that. So what bothers me, not bothers me, but what I worry about is if you buy a piece of property that has a building with a lot of open space, we'd be paying more because there's a building on it than if we just bought a site that had open space. By doing a building with open space, we're diluting our funds. And like I say, we don't have a lot of money. It's not like we got $25 million. So I get a little leery about that, to be honest.
So you're talking about the one that says incorporate components of 2 or more CPA categories?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So thinking that it might be okay not to delete that as a evaluation criteria?
Fine with me. You can delete it.
Okay, so I'll have other people respond as we call on them, but are there any other things that you want to talk about with the evaluation criteria? For example, would you want to weigh projects higher if they gave at least half of the funds from other sources?
Again, it's hard to generally say an answer like that, but I would tend to follow that. I wouldn't have a problem with that to me.
Okay.
Just so you know, we're at about 7 minutes.
Okay, let's just keep going. Okay, Dennis, anything else on the criteria before I call on, I think Alan is going to be next.
Well, no, let Alan go. He's very intelligent.
Okay, Alan, you're next.
Well, project with these general attributes will be given priority. That's a key term, given priority for CPA funding. So we don't want to throw anybody off. They're all good points. Demonstrate a broad community benefit, involve collaboration, benefit particularly vulnerable or systemically marginalized populations, incorporate components of 2 or more CPA eligible categories. That might be a little tricky there. Somebody might just have one idea in mind and not involving another eligible category. But the 5th point, include other sources of funding, or at least half. I think maybe I don't know if that's holding people to too much to the fire. Maybe something more like some portion of the total project costs instead of a percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least it's showing good faith on their half that they're trying to raise some money to help their project get through. But I don't know if somebody's looking for $1 million project and we're going to expect them to pay $500,000. I don't know how that's going to work.
Okay, fair enough. Any other comments on the criteria?
No, I think all of these things have good points, and they're all things that we're going to have to weigh when we make decisions with applications.
Okay. Okay, good. Elodie, I have you next on my screen here.
I will tell you, Jen, I didn't like this section at all. I think it could be tighter, cleaner, and personally, I think that members of the committee wrote better statements of prioritization than this is written. And I think this should be a lot simpler. For example, you could say serve more than one CPA purpose, or leverage other public or private funds. It's just what brings a project up to the top. And you could break that down into different categories, but some of this is too vague for me. I like specifics that are clear for people to understand. Demonstrate a broad community benefit. I get that part. And or community building. What is community building in this case? Including opportunity for and likely public use. Obviously, we are concerned about community benefit and public use. So, I just think there's a better way to say this. I think this needs a rewrite, whether it's given to projects that leverage funding from other sources or fill a gap where other sources of funds are not available. I know that Mark and I and a couple of other people were very concerned about demonstrating the cost sensitivity, the resource for how the funds are used, long-term maintenance, and the lifespan of the resource. I don't think this captures all the information we put down, plus what I heard and read from the focus groups, because that's the first time we asked this question. And when I see things like benefit particularly vulnerable or systemically marginalized populations or underserved areas, I think Chelsea, I think Gateway City. And this does not remind me of Watertown at all. And I guess it's just a little bit off-putting me. I don't relate to it. And I would not want this to go out as is right now to the community. I would not. I'm very clear about that.
Okay, and then the next person I see is Jason.
Okay, thanks. I think, so I might just sort of read right from the answers to the questions here, because I think it might be just the best way to express my thoughts. I'll try to make it brief. But for question number 1 about the half being the appropriate threshold, I understand the motivation behind this, but I feel strongly that we shouldn't have an explicit threshold. And the reason is, let's say we were to consider using CPA funds like we were discussing before, to support housing costs for those most affected economically by COVID-19, as other communities have. Wouldn't such requirement disqualify that that use of funds? Like it just seems like that is a kind of an onerous restriction that I think might be problematic. Question number 2 about the alignment of, with town goals versus, the public majority. I'll say that I think the value of the stated town and CPA goals is that they have been or will have been developed through very thoughtful and deliberative processes involving the input of many people, and that they should be thought of as guiding principles that we should always have in the back of our minds to guide our decisions. But in my personal opinion, there's some very vocal groups and organizations in the town that may wield a disproportionate amount of influence in our community, not on the basis of what I would think is the soundness of their arguments, but the volume of their voices. So I think we need to rely more on the sort of the source documents that we've put a lot of effort into coming up with to guide these decisions, and just kind of keep that in the back of our minds. I'll just do one more because I don't want to take up too much time. But question number 3 about any criteria that I think should be added. And unless I missed it on the list, I think the demonstrated capacity of an applicant and their team to sustain interest and commitment to the project, not to mention any funding they would commit outside of CPA funds, is really paramount. And this should include an experienced project manager, a very detailed multi-year plan to see the project to completion and maintenance beyond. Especially in the first few years of our work, I think it's critical for us to demonstrate to Watertown citizens, particularly those who voted against the CPA, that the adoption of CPA would be a benefit.
Jason, I second every remark.
Hello?
I second every remark that you've made. Excellent.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Just to finish that last one, that the adoption of CPA would be a benefit to the town and not an opportunity for people or groups to squander their tax dollars, even with the best of intentions. So I don't know. I have an answer to the 4th. Look, I'll just put it really generally. I'm not in favor of like writing too many criteria that are going to limit our ability to look at every project individually on its merits. And I was also saying, like, I've always considered myself like a relatively analytical and quantitative thinker, but the idea of having a scorecard that we have to assign values to every proposal on every sort of criteria just seems just too like we're going to hamstring ourselves. And I'd rather talk these through with the group and come to a decision with everyone's thoughts rather than sort of checking off boxes and adding up scores at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Jason. Thank you. All right, I've got Mark next on my screen.
And just so you know, we're at 14, almost 15 minutes for this section.
Yep. Go ahead, Mark.
Share some of Jason's and Elodia's concerns. I think
I can't hear you, Mark. Could you speak up?
I share some of Elodia's and Jason's concerns. I think there are too many of these things and they're too general to be really helpful in coming to a decision or using them to make a decision with an application. What had I written before here? I like the word Bob DeRico's in his comments. He used the word multi-generational as something that we would like to have in our criteria. A project that serves multi-generations, and I think we ought to incorporate that thinking. That's on number 1. We have to have a contribution, and I'm very mixed about that idea, because I think you might get a project which can't get other funding, and we would be a funding of last resort, and I want to keep that possibility open. So I'm not sure that you always need to have a contribution from the applicant. But if you had to have one, I prefer the idea of John's sliding scale. If the greater the public benefit, the lesser the contribution has to be outside of CPA. I agree with Jason that the priorities and goals we've set in other planning documents and in this CP document, the CP plan that we're putting together, should be governing. We shouldn't have, you got meetings where people get rabid, but they may not really represent the entire population. And I think if we get a good project, we'll know it's a good project. And if it conforms to the documents we've put together in the town documents, it is a good project.
Great, thank you, Mark. Okay, so who's next? I've got John.
Okay, thanks. I want to start with the question 4 and just in general support what Jason was saying. These items here, and I think they're pretty good items, but they're aspirations. They shouldn't be requirements. I don't think that they should be sort of equally weighted for every applicant. Some of these goals or whatever they're called are kind of contradictory to one another. Just as for example, I like number 3 about benefiting particularly vulnerable or systemically marginalized populations or underserved areas, because there are such populations and there may be such areas within our town, and this source of funding is supposed to help that sort of thing, but that is sort of contrary to demonstrate the broad community benefit, because if it's a particularly marginalized population, then helping that population is not necessarily a broad community benefit. So to get back to question 4, I could see that sort of overall, in terms of all the final recommendations of the town council, that we would aspire to hitting all these points and getting a very good balance, and if you want to call it equally weighted, whatever, of these things. But as to the individual projects, I think certain of these criteria would be more important than others, and we would only get a good diversity of projects by emphasizing one or two or a few of these for a certain project as compared to another project. Moving back to question 1 about the other leveraging funds. I like the idea of leveraging funds, but again, it should not be an absolute requirement at any particular number. If we're going to set a kind of aspirational number, I would start off in our life as a CPC with something like 20%, including volunteer and in-kind, and see how that plays out in terms of different projects. And there are some projects for which there just aren't a lot of other funding sources possible. That certainly comes up, I think, in community housing. On question number 2, about aligning with other town goals and so on, my thought is to combine 6 and 7, and that it's really alignment with other planning documents or demonstrate substantial public support. And in that, I think that the existing documents may be a bit dated, and they don't, cover the entire waterfront. So, it's great if there's an alignment there. On the other hand, if it's something that's not addressed in one of these reports, but there is, substantial demonstrated public support, I think that should count for something. And about other criteria, I like what Jason was suggesting in terms of future maintenance and operation, that the, identifying, sustainable sources of non-CPA funds for those things is very important. And also another one that I saw in some other municipalities, demonstrate a reasonable likelihood of accomplishing actions or steps needed for the completion of the project, including environmental assessments, permits, variances, other legal ramifications, so that it's not too iffy a project. It's not too pie in the sky, dependent on a bunch of things that may or may not happen. Excuse me, I just want to check my notes here. Also, I think we might mention again these as sort of aspirational goals, that the need or benefit of the project is supported by good data. Well, I think that might just speak for itself. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Maria.
Thank you. I would particularly agree with those last few points that John made there. And I'm just going to jump to the questions. So question 1, I strongly believe we should strike the at least half of the funding should come from some other source. I think it's too hamstringing. I think we should, you could just say some sort of funding can be provided for other project costs, but not stipulate a percentage. On question number 2, I can see where potentially a affordable housing project might, very well be in our plans as well as in a housing stock plan, but could have, allowed, and I wouldn't know if it would be majority, but it's perfectly how Jason explained it. It could sway you because they're vocal, like you say here. And I think you just have to listen to the concerns, but really if it's in our plans, then we need to try to find, either a compromise or do what is best in the interest of our community. I think Jason said that a little bit better, but I wouldn't, that's basically all I'll say there.
No, that was pretty good, Maria. I like the way you said it too.
Thank you. But basically, I'm just saying we can't just be swayed by a small minority of people that are just really vocal and may not want an affordable housing project in their neighborhood for silly reasons. And then under number 3, I just wrote completely agree with Jason's comment made here. I did have some stuff like that I would personally consider as other things to, that I put in my feedback, like I just hold near and dear to my heart climate resiliency and low impact development, but I don't think that should be some guiding principle, but it would certainly, be like a little bonus, like cherry on the top for a project for me, but I don't think it needs to be in any of this. It's just, I'm just verbalizing to my own committee members my beliefs. Numbers, it's 7? No, these got mixed. Oh, sorry, double-sided it. Number 4, I completely agree with what Jason said, and I just don't think I'm a little fearful that we're going to pigeonhole ourselves, or worse, open ourselves up to criticism or playing favorites by having too much of this like criteria that says it should have a weight, or even too much of this, once in a lifetime opportunities may come up that are clearly backed by plans, and we really don't want to hamstring ourselves with too much of this kind of weightedness. But I realize you're trying to have a delicate balance of all 9 of us and what we want. So
this is good. I'm actually hearing a lot of agreement. So Susan, I'm going to call on you next. And in the interest of time, if you could say if you either disagree with anything that someone said before you, or if you have anything that's new that nobody else has said yet.
Will this be very quick, because I agree with almost everything everybody said. I think I did totally agree with everyone. I have been looking at, we all of us did what, wrote some guiding principles, ideas, thoughts that I kind of assembled. And one of the things that I noticed a number of people had, and it just may not be something that can go in officially, and that had to do with projects that would add aesthetic value to the community, improve and enrich quality of community life. There was one other, I think. That's something that's kind of hard to quantify. But I like the idea, preserve and enhance the essential character of the town, and then you get into kind of what is our character. Prioritize projects consisting with underlying Watertown values. And maybe this is something we can discuss later, because I do think that there is an overarching kind of thing that we would like to do, which is to make Watertown a better place to live, and someplace that is looking at the long view.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let me move on. I'm trying to see if I've missed, I think Bob.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mine's been cutting in and out, so I did get all of Jason's responses.
Great.
And John's. I liked them a lot. And I agree with a lot of what the committee members just said, especially Jason's. All right. Because I caught the whole thing. But other than that,
Okay.
I'm going in and out. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. All right, now who did I miss here that's on the committee? Did I miss anyone? Did I get everybody? Okay, I think I must have gotten everybody. It's hard because I'm looking down this long line. I can't see everyone at once because of the screen share.
I think you got everybody.
Okay, great. All right, Avery, let's move on to the overall goals. So these are, relatively generic, but the big question here is, do you think the CPC should set aside the full 5% of admin costs every year? And I actually would like to skip this one. I don't think that we need to decide that right now. And I think that that's more up to the CPC themselves and how they want to run the program and what kind of admin costs they think that they're going to be needing. Rather than getting a ton of public input on that. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip down, Avery, to the first category.
You want to talk about any of the other ones? I think those are all.
I don't think right now. I think we can revive these again when we meet in July and talk more through that. Okay, but the category ones I think are very important for the community feedback, the rest of the community feedback that we're going to try to get. So, so I'm going to just go, I'll probably just go backwards this time. So I'll start with Bob. Any comments, either things that you didn't like about the open space and recreation goals or things that you think we're missing? And then the general questions are, number 9, how do you feel about using CPA funds for projects on state land? And then what about for private entities? And those are both eligible, but you may have a policy that says you prefer town-owned land or not. Avery, is there another question on the open space and rec goals, or is that the only one?
Yes.
Okay, so there's 10, is based on feedback from the community that access and recreation opportunities should be offered for most, if not all, green space in the community. The goals have been combined for open space and recreation categories. Do you think they should remain integrated, or should the goals be separated out for open space and recreation? Some communities have chosen to have one chapter or set of goals just for open space and passive rec, and then a separate chapter and list of goals for active recreation. 10A is, how do you feel about this notion of providing public access opportunities for essentially all green spaces? And then number 11 is, are there any other open space or rec goals that should be added? And I think that's everything for this one, right? I can't see the rest of it. Okay, so let's start with Bob. Any comments or thoughts on either those questions or just the goals that we did put out as draft?
I have a comment on support partnerships for the creation and enhancement of shared green spaces. Like with Perkins, Oakley, Mount Auburn Cemetery. I can't see how that can benefit the town very much. I'm not in favor of that. And how do you feel about CPA funds project on state land? I really don't know that that's doable either. I'd like to stay away from that. And the others, I'm just going through them now. I'd like to pass because I had a foul up in my communication, so I'm going to pass on that.
Okay, no worries.
All right.
Okay, so now, of course, people's order is changing a little bit on my screen, but I think Susan is maybe next.
I think I would. I just have two things really. Number one, I would prefer to separate open and green space from recreation. I think they have two kind of separate purposes in a way, and you could find an opportunity for one versus another, perhaps, and funding also. And what was the other one? Oh dear.
Oh, about the state using
these. I really, number two, the support for excuse me, threatened open space. You know, I would think that would, for me anyway, that would have a priority for me, just given that it had a time frame into which we would have to act.
Right.
So that's it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Susan. Maria?
On question 9, I'm okay with some money used for CPA funds, but I would not want to see it abused. And I have a particular park that is in dilapidated condition in mind, Canalonga. So that's my reasoning behind it, but I do value Bob's opinion on that. 9A, my answer to that was only if the land is open to the public. Like, for example, the Gore Place. It's a privately owned entity, but it's always open to the public. On question number 10, I'm whatever works is fine. That's it. And on 10A, I wrote explain further. I didn't know what the heck that
Oh, the opportunities. Well, sometimes you'll see projects that are about preserving habitat or green spaces that are have a environmental benefit, but maybe they aren't open to the public or can't be for some reason. And I guess the question is, would that be something you'd also want to consider funding, that type of habitat preservation or that type of thing, or is having the public access really should be part of the things that you fund?
I think it's project specific.
Community, Jen. Maria, you're on the Concom. Do you think of anything like that in our community?
I don't. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind when she said that was like a bird sanctuary, and like we don't really have that. But I don't know. We do have a nice little wetland restoration area that was the old Arsenal project that but that will be open to the public soon.
Okay.
Can't think of anything right now.
Okay, great. Okay, John, you're next.
All right, thanks. Let's see, I'll start with question 9 about CPA funding on state land. And sure, I'm certainly open to that. You know, the Charles River Reservation, if we're going to support any project along there, that's state land. And so I wouldn't want to rule that out. Of course, not supplanting other government funds, but so, and then what about private entities? Sure, I think it's expected that CPA funds will be available to support work on private entities, as long as it's quote, open and accessible to the public. And I'll get to that question in a minute. On number 5, criteria number 5 about for sustained and improved use, just a comment that I think we would need to give some guidance about what improved use means. Does that mean used in a better way, used for a sport that's more popular than it used to be, or is it an increased use? Just so giving some more meaning to that. On number 6, it talks about new trails and paths and connectivity between existing trails. Just want to suggest improve access to and connectivity between existing trails and paths. Number 7, item 7, I would not be in favor of specifically calling out non-motorized boating access. If we want to talk about new recreational opportunities along the Charles River, that's great, but I don't want to, in these kind of criteria, mention one particular type of recreational opportunity. And we should be clear that and I'm not sure that it's just for open space or recreation, that support of a new opportunity should not come at the cost of diminishment of an existing opportunity, let's say a passive recreation opportunity. So I don't want to give the impression that that new is always better. On question 10 about combining or not combining, I think it's sort of, however we do it, if we combine them, we may need to say for some of these criteria, for open space, this criteria, and for recreation, that criteria, or I think it's okay to separate them. Public access opportunities for essentially all green space. Well, I agree with what Jen was saying, that there are, I think they're pretty rare, but there are or may be some projects where there's a threatened habitat or a rare habitat, or where the value of the space is really entirely in terms of the view that it offers the public or makes possible. And just for example, there's that island in the Charles that's near the boat club. And I would not, want to open that up to any more public access than it has now. But there may be some, some habitat improvement project there that that makes sense. And so that gets me to question 11 about anything else. I like the idea of improving the health of wetlands and towns' water resources as a general goal, or one of several criteria. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay, so going up here, I think Mark is next.
I have a comment on item number 4. I would make that create and improve access and connection to, as well as accessibility of existing parks, playgrounds, and green spaces for public enjoyment and passive recreation opportunities. I would add, enhance the aesthetics and allure of such spaces through imaginative redesign and landscaping.
I like that.
Thank you. On number 5, I would amend that preserve and rehabilitate existing parks, playgrounds, and aesthetic fields on an environmentally sustained basis, or environmentally sound basis, I'm sorry.
And 6, create new trails and paths for walking and bicycling and improve connectivity between existing trails and community gathering areas. I would support the notion of using CPA funds to help fund projects on DCR land that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And using CPA funds on projects with private entities, yes, as long as we get a responsible amount of public access to them. What else? Separating open space and outdoor recreation. My own view is that most of our green space is really space that we use for passive recreation. And I'm not sure that we have, John makes a good point about the Allen and Charles River, but there are very few of those kinds of areas in Watertown. I think most of the green space we have are areas that we really want to use for passive recreation, since we have so little open space and available in Watertown. So I think I'd sort of veer toward keeping the two categories together.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, Jason, I have you next.
Okay, thanks. Again, I'm just going to read my written response to question 9, because that's probably the best way to summarize it. I'd say I have no objections to using funds for projects on state land. I'm wondering if the thinking there is that the state has its own budget, and therefore they can afford to fund projects on their own land from their own revenue sources, and therefore shouldn't rely on CPA funds as a boost. But I think that state budgets may be very squeezed over the next few years, and there may be some significant missed opportunities if we rely only on the state to fund projects on private lands. On their land. And I was thinking of an example. Since they've opened up that portion of Greenhow Boulevard recently to pedestrian and cycling use, we've used it many times, and I could see this hopefully becoming a permanent solution. It'd be a great opportunity to be able to use some CPA funds on some sort of park or other passive recreational space to support this use, fingers crossed. On the other hand, as it pertains to private entities, I think that's an entirely different conversation, and I would agree with the sentiment that others have expressed that unless this group or entity or whatever has a demonstrated policy to allow the public to use the space with relatively few restrictions, like the Mount Auburn Cemetery, for instance. And then I was kind of ambivalent about question 10 about the combining the open space and passive recreation with active recreation. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Jason. And sorry, Mark, I think I called you John before. I apologize for that. Okay, Elodia. Elodia, you're next.
Hey, Jen, I'll just try to go to the key questions. I had a lot of concern when we talk about state land. I understand what you're saying about DCR, but I always think about who is maintaining whatever is done. As you know, we were up for $25 million of IQ money. I've heard that that still is possibly in the hopper. One of the things they were looking at is renovating a little park down there for a kayak launch and things like that. I just feel like in some ways I don't know enough about this, because as Maria pointed out, they're not maintaining the park over in the District D. And so I always think about what is the key public benefit. Certainly I like to support, the river, because it's an important part of our town, but it's just, I feel like I'm still a little bit ignorant about that. As far as the private entities like Mount Auburn Cemetery or the Perkins School, when you look at the funding that they have available to them versus our funding, the little pitiful, what is it, 230 or 40 million is the Perkins School asset base, and we're talking about $6 million and change right now. So that would have to be a real sales pitch to me to go for something like that. I believe we do separate open space and passive recreation from the or kind of recreation, because I get a little nervous about, are we getting into maintenance issues? I do think that I do look for some imagination in our parks that Mark alluded to. And I would just love to see somebody come across with a really exciting play structure that isn't so cookie cutter, that I think would be a great add-on to a space, but not that we get sucked into renovating all these parks, because there's a lot going on. So again, that's another thing that I just feel like this is something I really need to see. With Maria, I totally agree. I didn't understand what 10A meant at all, because I've been in this town since 1975, and I'm going, where are these hidden treasures that I don't know about? And I couldn't come up with anything extra on number 11. So, you know, I don't think we really need to take care of the Oakley or the Perkins or the Mount Auburn Cemetery. DCR would be more appealing, but the big thing, again, is ongoing maintenance, sustained maintenance, etc. So those are my thoughts on that particular. Also, I just want to say, I want to go back to what Jason said earlier. I think this should be much simpler, something along the lines of expand and enhance open space as a land asset by, you know, and then that's kind of a key goal. And then something could be to improve walking trails and passive recreations, especially at Walker's Pond or the walkway along Saywin's. I think when we get a little too specific here, again, we're tying ourselves in very tightly. And I do believe that we should support resiliency in our open spaces and, you know, by acquiring underdeveloped or underutilizing land for conservation, flood control, you know, little pocket parks and recreation community gardens. But that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thank you. I have Alan next.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points made by Jason, Mark, Elodia, and so forth, and John. On question 9, again, how do you feel about using CPA funds for private state land? It's the same thing. I'm not sure about that, because who's going to maintain it going forward, such as along the Charles River in the DCR property? It's nice to do a project, but then we walk away, and who's going to take care of it after that? And what about private entities? Same point, as long as it had public access. Number 7, create new recreational opportunities along the Charles River, and then just strike the non-motorized boating access. And then if you go back to that, the original part, create new recreational opportunities, you know, we're going to trust DCR to maintain it, you know, going forward 5-10 years from now. And question 10, splitting them. Yeah, I think it should be two different areas, open space and passive recreation. That should be split. And providing public access opportunities for essentially all green spaces. Should this be a specified goal? No, I don't think so. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And I think Dennis may be the last one.
Yes, I agree with most things said. I like Susan's idea of splitting the recreation issue, and I like Mark's environmental position plus landscaping, of course. And I agree with John about the Bob, I'm sorry, about the private entity. And I'll just skip to number 11 since no one seemed to have one, and I did have a couple ideas. One would be a tree farm or an arboretum. And as far as birding goes, there's a lot of birding going on at the Mount Auburn Cemetery.
That's true.
That's it.
Thank you.
What was the first of the 2 ideas that you had?
The split. He thinks the chapters should be split. I think that's what you said, right,
No,
Dennis?
sorry, for
Yeah.
question 11, 2 new ideas. There was before the Arboretum. What was the first one?
The tree farm.
Tree farm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Avery, can you scroll down to the next category?
Yeah.
Could I just want to jump in, if I can, for a second, to say that if in the first section about the, whatever those are called, evaluation criteria, if we put up in there something about you know, funding for non-CPA funding for future maintenance and operations, I think that would address a lot of the comments that were made, and they're not just applicable to the open space and recreation.
Right. Okay, so the next category is community and housing. Avery, can you scroll down so I can see the questions that we asked? Okay, so question 12, how do you feel about using CPA funds to directly support income eligible individuals or families as opposed to creating units? So that would be like, you were talking about early, should we do a rental assistance program as an example? Number 13, do you think it is important for a portion or all units created using CPA to be counted on the subsidized housing inventory? I know that you've met the land area criteria, but you can still add units to the subsidized housing inventory. So just how important or not important is that for CPA funds? Question 14, are there other community housing goals that you think should be added? So let's focus in on these questions, and then if you would change anything about or add any other things about the goals that we suggested. So let's go from the top again. Dennis, why don't you start?
Okay. Basically, number question 12, I thought 70% must be from Watertown.
What's that? I'm sorry, you're cutting out a little bit. I couldn't hear everything.
Yes, I thought that 70% must be from Watertown.
Oh, yeah. You can have a local preference, but I mean, like an assistance program, for example, you could do a down payment assistance program for first-time home buyers or a rental assistance program. Those programs don't create actual units that are, physical units. They're eligible under CPA to do direct support for individuals or families with housing costs. And we just wanted to understand if that was something as a policy that the CPC wanted to have a goal about supporting that or not.
Well, I would be a hypocrite if I said no, because I've had a Section 8 tenant for 15 years. So I think that's kind of in the line of the question of supporting.
Yep. Yeah,
So
doing some local
I don't have
type
a problem with that.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on these other questions? Do you think that it's important about the subsidized housing inventory question about counting units on that?
I think it should be counted.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dennis. Okay, so you all are in a slightly different order now. So I'm just going to go down how I see it.
Excuse me. Can I just do 114?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, local preference is a must.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next person I see now is Susan, because the order flipped a little bit.
Oh, me. Okay.
Yep.
I'm up. Well, I guess on question 12, I feel like a bad person for saying this, but I really see that the CPA funds are kind of a long-term, a long view commitment to the health of the area and say community housing in general. So I'm not a big fan of emergency funds. Number 13, yes.
Okay.
And, I just don't know enough about community housing to add anything to question 14.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Susan. I have Alodia next.
Well, I believe in creating housing. I think that the rental assistance program, it depends how it would be formed, but some communities are subsidizing for 3 years at a time. At the end of that time, you still have the same problem. So I'm much more to see how we can create housing. We have hit safe harbor status. So we have met the goal as far as the state is concerned for having enough affordable housing legally, but I say we also have a moral obligation, and I would like to think about that more creatively. I totally agree that anything that we do should, get at that 80% or below AMI, and I absolutely agree that we need to do local preference calculation, which comes to 4 criteria: people who live in town, who are municipal employees, who are employees of businesses in town. We don't have a Metco program, but if somebody had a student in this community and then wanted to be able to get into the lottery, they could, or for whatever reason. town has not done this, and it really concerns me, and I've been harping on it for a year and a half. Also, there's a lot more that we could be doing with the inclusionary zoning. There's a lot more negotiation that can be going on to get a better deal that I don't think we're doing as good a job on as we could. So I have a lot of ideas about this, and I've attended at least 3 affordable housing conferences to date. The one I was supposed to do in May was canceled. So those are my answers for that, Jen.
Thank you, Elodia. Okay, Alan.
Yeah, going down the list, community housing number 6, expand local resources available for direct rental and home buying assistance. Again, I'm gonna bring up the term that I'm gonna use, intermediary agency. We can't write individual checks for $1,500 a month for people's rents. This all has to be handled by an intermediary agency. We can certainly write a check for $1 million to the intermediary agency, and that comes back to question 14, other local community goals, as long as it goes to local preference. I think Dennis said the same thing. Question 12, how do you feel about using CPA funds to directly support income eligible individuals or families? That's all well and good, but again, it has to be handled by a qualified intermediary agency. We have the money, we need somebody to administer legally the money. That's all I'm saying. We got to get involved with an intermediary agency. And 80% or below are units created, yes, added to the subsidized housing list. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Jason?
Yep. So question 12, I think that this could really become a slippery slope quite quickly. It's ripe for accusations of preferential treatment, regardless of anyone's intentions or commitment to impartiality, and I just don't think we need that. So, but again, you know, like Alan said, you know, if we probably couldn't do this even if we wanted to. So, maybe we should move on from that. And then for question 13, I think definitely if we're committed to achieving the 10% threshold for 40B, then I think that it does need to be a requirement. And I also think that the optics of subsidizing housing for households making above 80% AMI would not be a good look for us under the circumstances. So, and no, question 14, that I think those pretty much covered it for me.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Mark?
Thanks.
Let me see. Since we are in fact a community that has most of our 47% of our units are rental housing units, and we do have a fair amount of people who are being severely affected by COVID-19, and even without COVID-19 are some dire straits. I do think it makes sense to do a rental assistance program at some point. With respect to, I do think we ought to support the 10% affordable housing goal, and I think that's an obligation on our part. I think it should be a badge of honor for us. I think we should certainly put that as a goal, and that should be something we should strive for. I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Mark. John?
Thanks. So first about question 12, I think that there's a bit of misunderstanding about, comes from the wording of that question. I mean, I think it goes without saying that the CPC is not going to be running any programs other than, you know, the CPC. And whatever we do, it's going to be funding that goes to some project proponent where somebody else, the town, some nonprofit, maybe individuals, you know, run the project. So, you know, this question is really about funding that kind of project where the proponent does this, not where the CPC does this. And I would be in favor of being open to that kind of project where it's you know, direct rental support. You know, provided, of course, that it's a well thought out and appropriately staffed program that you know, has promise of being run, you know, objectively and not subjectively. And you know, from that webinar of from MAPC, et cetera, It's clear there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. A lot of things need to be decided about this kind of program. But in general, I would want to be able to recommend funds for that kind of program. Question 13 about the 80% AMI. Yeah, I'm in favor of that. We've got to, prioritize our funds and helping support units or people that are, for the lower end of the income range. I think that's a good idea. Any other housing goals? And yeah, I would be in favor of saying that we want to be able, and we might favor a project that responds to emergency situations that result from natural disasters, fire, or widespread economic disaster. And so, if there's a tornado that touches down in town, if there's a fire that affects multiple housing units, or if there's an epidemic, that we need to recognize that there are times when we need to support an emergency program. So I would be in favor of saying so in these criteria. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Maria?
Well, in question 12, I agree with John. I thought maybe there's some confusion from some of the committee members on how it's worded. My answer to that is I would definitely prefer that to be administered through proven agencies. I forget the term that Alan used.
Intermediary agency.
Intermediary agencies, but one specific. What's that?
For lack of a better term.
Intermediary agencies. So, but I was, like Metro West Collaborative,
yeah,
a veterans group, but I was also thinking about Habitat for Humanity, and I could see a small group like that where it would literally be for one family taking a home and making it a deed in perpetuity for low income. So my answer to that is yes, but of course I'd much prefer not to deal with one. I don't think it's wise for us to be dealing with an individual family, but an entity.
Mm-hmm.
Number 13, the answer is yes. And number 14, it does seem to make sense to have some sort of local preference.
Thank you, Maria. Okay.
Oh, and I have a suggestion for the next section. Either given the time, you don't read the questions, we can see them on the screen, or we provide our answers via email.
Okay, good idea. Thank you, Maria. Bob, you're next.
Yeah. I'll just go through everybody's comments, or a few of them that I liked. Local preference, definitely. A lot of people commented on that. Susan, I loved your comment. Long-term commitment to health of the community. I agree with that as well. Create housing, rental assistance for that. Alan, great comment about qualified intermediary agency. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, Avery, what's the next category?
Historic, it's the last one.
Okay.
All right, can I again jump in? I'll be very brief, just to say that there's another side to the local preference, and I understand the local preference, and and I like giving preference to people who are here, who grew up here, that kind of thing. The other side to it, though, is that we don't want to just say, okay, the demographics of this town are what they are, and we're just going to prefer people who are already here, and we're going to be unwelcoming to people who aren't already here. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any local preference. I'm just saying that we need to think about a balance of those things. Thanks for indulging me.
Local preference is a percentage, and the highest percentage it can be is 70%. Lots of surrounding communities have it. For rental, it's only on the first go round of a rental. But I think local preference becomes important when we have condos coming online that can be subsidized for municipal employees that might want to live in town, or somebody here that would qualify for that at this point. And again, it's only a percentage. It's not shutting the door to anybody else to come into our community. And I think that's it keeps coming up that way, as though Watertown is closing the doors. That's not it at all. But we're also trying to take care of elderly in our community and other people in our community through different circumstances.
Thanks.
Okay, so this is the last area. Avery, how many questions are there? I see 15. I can't see the rest.
2.
15 and 16. Okay, can you put those both on the screen? Thank you. Okay, so Bob, why don't you just start and we'll go on up.
Okay. Um, well, I do support the acquisition of premises. Yeah, number one, I would support that. Number two, definitely. Number three, maybe. I don't know. And I'd have to get some examples. And I think number four is very important. Improve public access. Okay. And I don't know any other community housing goals you think that should be added.
Oh, sorry, that's supposed to say historic.
Oh. Yeah.
All right. All right.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Okay, so the next one I have is Maria.
I agree. I starred number one. My answer to number 15 is really tricky. I feel like if I feel like I don't know enough about it, but it seems like privately owned properties really should, that unless there's public access and we determine that, you know, we say there has to be so many events held open to the public or something like that, it probably shouldn't get funded through this resource, because a piece of land or a property that gets to have a great improvement upon the sale of that property shouldn't be at the benefit of the majority of our tax base, you know, from this tax base. That's all I have for that. And then number three, I had said no, and I don't know enough to answer number 16.
Yeah, and if I could just, Maria, it's a good point you raised. We didn't give examples. So, you know, one example that I'll just throw out in another community, we're looking at putting a preservation restriction on a 1690 house that will remain in private ownership, but with the preservation restriction, it would never be able to be torn down or subdivided. It's a larger piece of land. And any changes to both the exterior and the interior would need to be reviewed by Historic New England, is likely the entity that will hold the restriction. So that's the kind of thing that would not allow public access. It'd be a private home, and you don't have to fund something like that, but that's certainly eligible for CPA funds to permanently protect an historic resource that could otherwise be torn down or, you know, altered. And you could still say my answer's the same, even with that example. But I just wanted to throw that example out because it's something that people may not think about.
And that seems reasonable. I probably would defer to Susan on that and what she thinks. I actually was so stumped by this. I asked my husband because he's played music and events at the Commander's Mansion, and we've been there, and there's an income stream there. So it's a little tricky to say, yeah, I want to use this tax base of money for, I don't know. So I don't know enough, but I would defer to Susan.
Okay, thank you, Maria. John, I have you next.
Okay, so on question 15, so under the statute, if CPA money is being given to you know, a private entity, there has to be a deed restriction put on that, you know, whatever, you know, that protects the improvements that we help fund. As a generalization, I'll say, if funds are only being used to improve or protect the, not improve is the wrong word, but to protect the exterior of a structure, then I don't see that there necessarily has to be, that the public benefit comes from access to the interior of the structure. It's being able to, you know, to see that, that exterior from the public way. And so that, you know, gets into improving an exterior of you know, a side of a building that's not facing a public way. You know, those are you know, details. But so in general, I don't want to say that there has to be interior access. It could be that exterior access is sufficient. Number three, I guess it's sort of the same question. Privately owned historic resources that are or will be open to the public. Again, interior access, you know, should not always be required. I don't have any suggestions for other criteria.
Thank you, John. All right, Mark.
I formulated a different thing here, and I'd like to read it because I think it's very different from what you have there. And I say historic preservation projects to preserve and enhance the understanding of Watertown's pre-colonial and colonial past, its place in the early republic, its history of early industrialization, and lastly, its role as a home and workplace for successive waves of immigrants since the late 19th century. So I'd like to sort of get in this part a little flavor of what Watertown's history is, rather than sort of talk about buildings and monuments and talk about what our periods of our past history are and what parts of that we want to preserve.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, I think you make a distinction here between private and public, but you're not really talking about many of these historic properties are actually owned by nonprofits, such as Gore Place. Or
I wouldn't count that as private. I'm counting a private or, you know, private homeowner. You could look at both as just private entities.
Okay.
I like what Mark said about the pre-colonial and all that. That was a comment.
Yeah.
But Mark, could you give an example of what you would be talking about? Because I love the statement, but I didn't know how it became how it would become tangible, because we are talking always about preserving a tangible item or object, you know, and so that's kind of like, well, I couldn't figure out what you meant by it. I like the sentiment, but do you have any examples in mind that you could just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, for example, for the pre-colonial, we have the Adam Brown House, which is owned by the historic New England.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
Edmund Fowler.
a bunch of 19th century, early 19th century houses in town, the Pratt House, for example. In terms of the Arsenal, is a prime example of places where a lot of immigrants worked at one point. And so that sort of is important to preserve. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jason?
Yeah, so for question number 15, I totally agree with what Maria said. You know, I think, but maybe there's a better way to approach it, which is to, rather than just like disqualify such applications, we could like precondition the allocation of CPA funds to a project by a private entity on the commitment to enhance public access to their properties. Like, again, Commander's Mansion, you know, we could fund a project if they were willing to commit to a certain number of like open houses in a year, or, you know, hosting community events, you know, on a certain schedule. So more of a carrot approach than a stick, so to speak. And I didn't have any really other suggestions for community housing. I'm also going to use this opportunity to say that I need to leave the meeting now. I understand it's almost over, but I did not have dinner beforehand and I'm absolutely starving. Okay. So I'm going to sign off and say thank you to everyone. It was great to see you all again, and see you all soon.
Thanks, Jason.
Bye, Jason.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, I have Alan next.
Yeah, on question 15, I think my only response would be a sort of a generalization that whatever is done, it should be in line with the Historic Commission rules and regulations. Yep. You know, public accessible, not public accessible, I don't know, but the Historic Commission has been around a long time. I think they know what they're talking about. So if we did get approached by someone that with a project like this, we could rely upon them for their expertise.
Thank you. Okay, Elodia.
Well, I think this gets a little hairy because many of us live in houses that are 100 years old. I do. Mine's built in 1897. So, wow, I'd love to apply for the CPA to get funding to tear off aluminum siding that I never put on my house and restore it. So I find this to be kind of sticky because you would have a much more attractive house to look at. I'd be very happy. And
conflict of interest.
Pardon me?
The conflict of interest.
Yeah, because and I can apply. So,
you can.
I just think there's I like Jason's idea of preconditions, but I'm kind of with Maria on this as well. I think we have bigger priorities with regard to town-owned properties. that we might want to be looking at. I don't know that the Historical Commission has ever done a study on Watertown properties. We know people that own other properties within Watertown. But again, I come back to what kind of funding do they have to support what they're doing versus the money that we have to really benefit Watertown first. And I guess that's where I'm kind of sticky about that stuff. So that's my answer. I think I figured out that I figured question 16 was in the wrong place. So that's all I have to add, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you, Elodia. Okay. And I think Dennis is the only last one, right?
Me, Susan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. People keep moving
You don't
around
wanna-
on
you
my
don't want to leave
screen.
me out, I don't think.
Susan, why don't you go and then we can have Dennis go.
Okay, well, I also, after this meeting, plan to kind of take the various comments, including my own, to the Historical Commission and see if there are any that they have thoughts about. But starting with question 15, I think if it were properly worded, that it would be a good thing, given the kind of the right proposal, to support organizations like the Historical Society or the Armenian Museum, even the Plumbing Museum and the Brown House. It is the oldest house we have in Watertown. And these are all places that, these are all organizations, or in the Brown House's case, and the Commander's Mansion, but the Brown House's case in particular, that really speak to the history of the town. And I think we ought to find a way to be able to respond to requests, say, if the Armenian Museum has some objects or that need repair or restoration, that we ought to be able to consider it. And I don't know how we would phrase that, but that's really something that I would like to do a little more research into. Yes to 2, yes to 3, yes to 4, although I would like to, and this kind of relates to question 16 a little bit. I'd like to make sure that in number 4, we're not just restricting ourselves to physical buildings, but also to other resources, such as objects and documents, and signage, for that matter. One thing that the Historical Commission is looking into is a way to bring history to the streets, maybe coordinating with what's going to be going on Mount Auburn Street, because if you take the history of Mount Auburn Street, it really is very much the history of early Watertown. So that would be something that I would really like to include in number 4.
Yeah,
So,
I like the idea of expanding it beyond buildings, or just making it clear. But I just want you to know that the CPA can't fund anything that's purely educational. If there were historic signs, though, those could be refurbished, restored, put back up, that kind of thing.
oh, that's right.
Yeah,
No,
but the objects, the artifacts, the documents, I think that we could be more specific about all of those things rather than just saying historic resources.
okay, great.
Okay, so that's everybody. Oh no, Dennis, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Last but not least, I comment. I like Mark's idea because there's a lot of firsts in the new world in Watertown. Probably the most famous that not many people realize. It always bothered me that never got his due is that the first treaty of the new country, the United States of America, was signed at the Edmund Firehouse. And it just bothers me to no end that the federal government doesn't make this some kind of a museum and fund it in. But anyway, as a student at LSU, I did a thesis on the arsenal. And the one thing I included that would be nice in Watertown is a museum on the history of Watertown. may not qualify, but it's an idea. Like and there's the two. 3 is up in the air. Yes, I'm 4. And I think that's it.
Right.
So are we going to close down now? Because I'd like to make a closing statement.
That's everything that Avery and I had. I don't know if there's other business, but I'll put me on. I'll go on mute. And Avery, I think you can stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
Is that it, Alodia?
We're all set except adjourning, Dennis. So please go ahead, and then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn and need a roll call.
Okay. First of all, and lastly, I wanted to say to Dr. Thomas, thank you and congratulations on your chairmanship. Thank you for all your efforts. And I move we adjourn the meeting. Good night, Leo.
Thank you, Dennis. May I have a second on adjournment? Thank you, Alan. Lene, could you please do a roll call for me?
Sure. So Alodia,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Alan,
Aye.
Jason's gone. Susan,
Yes.
Maria,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John. John there?
I'm
John?
sorry. Yes, definitely. Please.
Are we done?
Yes.
Done.
One question of Jen. I'm sorry, I should have asked this before we absolutely recessed. What's the next step now, Jen?
Yeah, so we're going to work on a revision of based on everything that we've heard tonight. And if anybody wants to send us other comments, that's fine. Just send them to Lene. But within the next week, we'll have a new version out. Is that the right timing, Avery?
Yeah.
And you're going to send that back to us?
Yeah. And then Avery, when do we need to put it up on the website? Just remind me of
We had talked about having the video recorded and the content up on the website by the 11th of June. So we have about 2 weeks.
Okay. All right.
Alodia,
Can I ask a quick
will our next
question?
meeting be on Zoom? We don't know.
No, in all honesty, right now, Dennis, I am waiting to hear what the town does on June 1st with new policies. And obviously, we're going to be working, Avery's going to get something back to us, and we may have another off meeting just to quickly check in with each other to see, is this in alignment now, given everything we discussed? So we will do that. I'm not trying to be evasive. I just don't know.
No, I know, but because I wanted to say, you know, normally you look like you're in your 40s, but on Zoom you look like you're 30.
Oh, okay.
And also, I want you to know you can't see my picture. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, but I'm keeping my streak alive. I have a tie on.
Had one more question or comment that I missed, I think.
Yes. Real quick, could I ask for the schedule that was, or a copy of the presentation?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to forget those dates. I mean, I quickly jotted them down. And also,
Yeah, I can send that out.
Thank you. And also, Alodia, I mean, I don't want to belabor the rental assistance thing, and I think you're correct. It's not the time right now. But I would love to have a copy of that letter from...
I'll be happy to send it out to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Avery, as soon as you get that to the committee, that's great. Lene will distribute everything. If anybody has any follow-up comments, again, please forward them to Lene. If you have any other concerns that you want to add for this document, I believe the cutoff date that you had for that was, where is it?
It would be great if we could have, to be able to incorporate into the revisions, it would be great if we could have any additional comments by Monday.
By Monday.
Just a little bit different than what we had originally talked about, but because we decided to do this mostly as a conversation, to be able to get that turnaround in those revisions, I think that'll make sense since you guys have already written down, you know, most of your thoughts.
Right, okay. Is Monday a little tight for people, or do you need?
Yeah, I think so.
It's probably going to be tight for some people, like privately.
We could do, will Tuesday be better?
Yep.
Okay.
And this is just for what, more comments than what we already just gave you?
It's just that if you have more specifics, I was taking notes the whole time, but if you have additional thoughts
If there's
or
anything
comments,
that you didn't say tonight,
yeah.
we have what you said tonight.
Something you're thinking later on and all of a sudden you say, wait a minute, or you frame it differently, that would be great. Thank you for bearing with the meeting, folks. I'm sorry, this is our first go round. Thank you, Sam, for your behind the scenes work. Thanks, Jen, Avery. Tot ziens, which in Dutch means till I see you again. And
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.